The rest of this presentation is kind of walking through and trying to help you issue spot other areas where I see a lot of problems, where I see a lot of claims come up, kind of the problem areas that you need to be aware of. And we're just going to start with hiring, because that's where it all starts, you know. Any job applicant is a potential liability to you depending on how you handle it. So you need to think about your recruiting practice, you know. Are you trying to attract a diverse employment population? That's pretty basic, and it's a little hard around here because frankly we're not all that diverse. But then just, you know, the basics. If you looked at your job application for a while, do you have a good at-will employment disclaimer on there? Do you have a good EEO policy that's updated with all the recent law changes? Those kind of things. These things that they're easy to just kind of sit on the shelf and pull them out when you need them, especially if you're not hiring all the time. But they're things that they all require a little bit of maintenance. You have to kind of pay attention to them every now and then. I got an employer who sent me an employee handbook last week that hadn't been updated since the 90s. Well, they might as well have not had an employee handbook, you know, since the 90s. Things had changed fairly dramatically. Verbal and written warrant offers on the bottom. You also need to think about those because sometimes courts will view those as contracts. So you write an offer letter and you put in an annual salary, for example. Well, if you don't have a good at-will employment disclaimer on there, some courts have said that's a year-to-year contract. That you're promising them a year-long employment stint. I've talked about this a little bit. You know, frankly, we've been interviewing and I've got attorneys in our office that are doing the interviewing, but they don't do employment law all the time. And there were some questions they wanted to ask that I was like, no, you can't ask that. You know, you're a lawyer, don't you know that? You can't ask that. And they're like, well, we should be able to know that. We should be able to, well, okay, you know, this isn't all intuitive. It doesn't all make common sense. The people who pass these laws, frankly, most of the time don't have to abide by them. And so they don't realize what, you know, how it really plays out in day-to-day. But you need to think through I made our lawyers write down what they're going to ask. And so you have to ask these same questions to every one of these candidates. And you aren't going to, you know, don't stray from this script very much. Background checks, we alluded to this a little bit before. If you're going to do them consistently. Don't just pick one person that you think, you know, looks a little sketchy. You want to check their background, but you're not going to check anybody else's. Make sure you do that consistently and make sure you tell the person you're going to do that and you get their approval to do that. Get that in writing. Very many of you, raise your hand. Do you do pre-employment testing, physical testing? Yep. Anybody do drug, alcohol testing? It's becoming more and more common in my experience anyway, just frankly because a lot of employers just don't want to be the employer of choice for the abusers because everybody else is doing testing. You need to be careful about that as well. The ADA has very strict rules about both physical tests and alcohol tests. Drug tests, testing for illegal drugs is kind of exempt. And you can generally do what you want there unless you've got employees in other states. Minnesota and Iowa have very strict requirements about what you can do in the process. You can do it, but you have to follow their process. So generally you want to use a local provider who knows that process that's reputable to make sure that's done correctly. For a physical test, if you're trying to make sure that they can perform the essential functions of the job or you're trying to do a baseline for work comp claims or something like that, you just need to make sure that's done after you make a conditional job offer. So you decide, yep, I'm going to, you know, offer the job to you, but it's conditional on a background check, or it's conditional on a physical test, or it's conditional on a drug and alcohol test.